Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Virtual Education Law Symposium. My name is Mary McElroy, and I'm pleased that I am able to spend this time with you today to talk about inclusion in Catholic schools, observing legal protocols in a welcoming environment. The goals of this presentation are to define inclusion, increase awareness of special education laws, reflect on examples of inclusion in the Catholic school classroom, identify potential pitfalls, we always seem to have those, and to keep on top of legal protocols. Let's begin with what is inclusion. Inclusion is the situation in which students with disabilities are educated with their non-disabled peers, with special education supports and services provided as needed. There's also a quote from Beth Foraker from the National Catholic Board on Full Inclusion, who says, "For me, inclusion means this: giving all children access to the curriculum, supporting students who need support, having high expectations for all students, and presuming competence for all students." Let's reflect on high expectations and competence. Students come to school to learn, and we should have high expectations for all of them, and realize that students do enter our classrooms with competence. The competence needs to be developed, but it's there to begin with. This rather wordy slide is an excerpt of statistics from the Office of Special Education's 42nd Annual Report to Congress on IDEA. And this slide, through its wordiness, really points out that in 2018, 95% of students spent at least some of the day in a regular classroom. But the majority of students really have spent 80% of their day in the regular classroom, showing that inclusion really is happening. And that's certainly true of our Catholic school classrooms, where resource rooms are not always available, or not always the structure that the school has chosen. And it's really important to realize that 80% or more of the day is spent in the regular classroom by students who have special needs. Inclusive settings. Don't assume that a specific disability requires a certain setting. We don't match the child to the setting, but the setting to the child. And that really is because services can be delivered in a continuum of settings. There is no one size fits all. Special education by its nature is individualized. It helps that there are personnel with various types of expertise who can serve students, and that services can be configured in different ways to match individualized special education needs of students. How does inclusion look in the Catholic school classroom? This is a very brief video about one school's experience with inclusion. Let's take a look at it, and we'll talk about it a little bit on the other side.
Every person has a purpose, and a school's job and a family's job and a church's job is to help them find that purpose.
We kind of courted the principal, introduced him to Mike, sent him a book and described Down syndrome. I think he was looking for a way for it to work, but initially said no.
Our principal came to us in a staff meeting and said, Mr. Meehan has asked that Mike be included, and none of us are special ed teachers, so that was a legitimate concern.
We didn't have all the answers starting out. We felt at times like we were inventing things.
It's not easy to include students of different ranges. It can be frustrating.
Would it have been easier to just let Mike be in a special education classroom?
Would it have been easier?
Probably.
Maybe. But it wouldn't be Mike Meehan as we know him today. This school would not be the same.
Church and teaching me and teacher.
And it's important for those children that have disabilities to be accepted so that they have dignity.
Well done. We truly believe there's a space and a place for all kinds of different people.
We don't live in a perfect world. And so it's very important, I think, that all of our kids learn that there is diversity and everybody's not the same. And thank goodness.
There's nothing miraculous about St. Joe's. There's great principals and great teachers all over the place. St. Joe's could be duplicated just about at any school in the Archdiocese. You just have to be willing.
This is worth the effort because if you do keep working with this kind of culture, it can have very, very long-term effects on kids. I want kids to do well academically. I want kids to go as far as they can academically, but I want them to be good people. And when I hear that they're both, it's like, okay, now I know I do this.
That video shows how the school made a careful decision. At first, the principal said no to including the son of a parishioner at the school. But the principal reconsidered after he consulted with faculty, and they realized that no, they didn't have all the answers. And they spoke to the parents about that. And they included Mike, and the school became richer for that. Faculty worked harder, sure, but they found their way through the process of including a student with disabilities. And as noted in the video, that school is not miraculous in and of itself, and inclusion is certainly something that can be replicated in other settings. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about some of our local stories of inclusion. I'm focusing on 4 students who are in elementary school. George and Miguel happen to be classmates. George has autism and Miguel has a specific learning disability. In fact, he has dyslexia. George has trouble with transitions in particular and gets upset easily when he's flustered. Miguel has realized that instinctively and has reached out to help George overcome those little bumps, in a way anticipating sometimes things that might be the difference between a little moment of uncertainty and a meltdown. And Miguel has been a support to his friend George. Likewise, George has offered encouragement to Miguel when Miguel struggles with spelling tests. For example, Miguel gets apprehensive about the spelling tests due to his dyslexia, and George reassures him that it will be okay. The teacher in their class very much uses differentiated instruction for George and Miguel, so that she is providing instruction that is really appropriate to their needs. Anna is in another local Catholic school, and she has Down syndrome. She's been at her school since kindergarten and is fully integrated into all the aspects of the school and has really enjoyed being a student at this school. She's now looking forward to high school, and already her parents have started the search for a high school that will have the same type of inclusive culture as her local elementary school. That's going to be a little bit of a search. There is one high school, the high school that her older sister attends, where the principal felt that they could not offer a place for Anna. And that's a sadness to Anna's parents, but they have not given up their goal of continued Catholic education for their daughter. And I'm happy to say that there are at least 2 other high schools that are both looking forward to welcoming Anna on tour, to meeting with her, to having discussions with her parents, so that Anna can continue her Catholic education through her high school years. Noah is a student who had been at public school and seemed to be floundering. He has a developmental delay, and his parents were hoping that the local Catholic school would be able to help him. And I'm happy to report that the services Noah receives, although not as extensive as he had in the public school, are really targeting his needs. He has supplemental instruction. His teachers realize that he needs to have things modified. They take an individualized approach with Noah, and the school as a whole, the culture is supportive. Noah is very much a full member of his school community, and that has made the difference. He's blossoming at his local Catholic school, and his parents are grateful that they were able to choose Catholic education for their son. When we talk about stories of inclusion or inclusion in general, what does inclusion ask of us? A few things, actually. The first is honesty. We need to be honest with ourselves, our faculties, and our parents. Is inclusion hard? It can be. Is it extra work? Yes, it's work. But all of these things are certainly able to be overcome, especially if we're honest with each other. We need to be also honest about expectations, and to have expectations of administration and faculty, surely, of parents. Parents need to be partners here, and you need to have expectations of students. Students are here for an education, and we expect that they will be able to receive that. Partnerships, yes, we partner with parents. We partner with the school district. We partner with faculty and the student. We are all in this together. And as partners, we move forward. One of the things that helps us move forward is advocacy. Advocacy is what my mom used to say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If we're quiet, everyone thinks that, oh, everything's fine, or there is no need, or we don't have to do anything differently. It's important that all of us, in whatever role we have, become advocates for the way forward of including all students who desire a Catholic education in Catholic education to the best of our ability, and to be honest when that is a real challenge, and to look at ways to mitigate that challenge, to do the best we can with what we have, and to keep pushing for what will get us to where we need to be. And adherence to the law is certainly something that is in everyone's best interest, to make sure that we don't run afoul of any of the laws that affect special education. When we look at special education laws, we deal primarily with IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act. Then there's Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the American Disabilities Act. We'll spend most of our time at this session on IDEA. The law originated back in the 70s with the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. And that was a watershed statute because for the first time, it enshrined in statute the premise that all children have the right to a free, appropriate public education. Prior to Public Law 94-142, it was legal for a school, a public school, to say to parents, oh, we're sorry, we can't educate your child here. We don't have a program for your child. This won't work. We're sorry. Your child can't come. And that seems strange to us today. It seems, something that's a little bit hard to fathom. And that makes us think of the strides that the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, now very firmly referred to as IDEA, the strides that that law has made, especially in considering that the least restrictive environment is the hallmark of where special education is to take place. When we started this session, we spoke about the setting, that you don't mold the child to the setting needs to work with the child where the child's needs are. And the least restrictive environment means that the child should be educated in the environment that is on a continuum, and that continuum should be as close as possible to being with his usual peers, the peers in general, that the services should be delivered where they will best help the student be in a usual education setting. Special education, definitely not a place, it's a service. When we take a minute to look at the growth of IDEA, it's interesting to see that major changes have not happened all that long ago. Early intervention services were added in 1986, which is the provision of services for a child from birth through age 3. And the law then continues all the way through age 21. In 1990, autism and traumatic brain injury were added as disability categories. And then in 1997, ADHD became added as a subset to the disability category other health impaired. The procedures for identification of learning disabilities were refined only in 2004. And the concept that impairments or conditions in remission are still considered disabilities came in 2008. This last bullet mentions Rose's Law, not part of IDEA, but important in its own right because that law changed the phrase mental retardation to intellectual disabilities across all federal laws. And that only happened in 2010. We'll take a look at a few of the provisions of IDEA. There are 13 disability categories, which are specifically and carefully defined. They're listed at the bottom of the slide. They are the categories that a student needs to be found to be qualifying for this category so that they would then be eligible for services. So the child needs to have a disability that's one of the enumerated disability categories, and that disability must adversely affect educational performance. So it's the disability category, and that educational performance is adversely affected. Services are then determined through the use of an individualized education program, which is referred to as the IEP. We spoke about how the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was the first one to guarantee that all students have the right to a free, appropriate public education. Our students in Catholic schools are what are referred to as parentally placed students, meaning simply that parents made the choice for their student, their child, to enroll in a Catholic school. A wonderful choice. But by making that choice, parents have stepped away then from the what we call FAPE, the free appropriate public education. FAPE is available at the public school. When parents choose a non-public school, in this place or Catholic school, for their children, the funding mechanism is different. The funds for special education, the funding under IDEA, is not a per student allocation. It is a per capita allocation, meaning that the funds do not have to specifically be spent on the child with the disability that has generated those funds. And what that means for students and school districts and Catholic schools is that the school district makes the final determination on exactly what services are provided with those IDEA funds. So it's very important for families and schools standing in their stead to advocate for their students, for what their needs are, for what services will help their students when they meet with the school district. And that generally happens during consultation regarding the school programs. When we look at IDEA in the Catholic school, we want to focus on child find, then how the child study team services work, the ability to have specialized instruction and related services, and then the annual review and triennial of reevaluation. Child find is probably one of the most important provisions in the IDEA, because child find sets the responsibility squarely for the district that all children with disabilities who are in need of special education and related services are identified, located, and evaluated. And then a practical method is developed and implemented to determine which children with disabilities are currently receiving needed special education and related services. So in other words, it's the state's responsibility as carried out by the district. And each district is responsible for child find to really seek students who may be in need of special education services, so that those students can be seen by the child study team, who can evaluate if the student is eligible, and then if so, what will happen on the way to developing the services that should be offered to the child. So the child study team convenes. It's generally staffed either by the local district or perhaps a provider that the district hires, and they meet to determine eligibility. And once eligibility is determined, then the team establishes the areas that should be tested to pinpoint what the suspected issue is and what the disability then would be, one of those 13 disability categories. Classroom teachers on the team, parents are on the team. The case manager, who is part of the child study team provided by the district, they coordinate the meetings. They make sure that everyone signs off on attendance. They coordinate the reports that come from evaluation. And they also manage the annual review. The principal is expected to be aware of the child study team meetings and really should participate, The meetings are generally set on a schedule where the school is notified that the team will be coming, and they'll generally set up, a number of meetings throughout a day or over 2 days' time. And it's really important that the principal, who has so many responsibilities, really make it their business to be at the Child Study Team meeting, so that this way they are aware of the services that are offered. They can speak to the student's progress, and they can certainly convey the expectations of the school in how the services should be conveyed or delivered. Specialized instruction delivered by a specialized teacher in a small group setting. There were the days of, pulling out and going to a trailer. It's funny, sometimes you don't have to be in a trailer, but sometimes you see the trailers only because the school doesn't have enough room to have a small group meet. Small group setting is fine, but really push-in services are usually considered to be most valuable, especially when you look at the whole idea of inclusion. The specialized teacher really just pushes in to the classroom and works with the student right there in real time, after conferring with the teacher, the classroom teacher, on the areas that are being covered in connection with the service plan and what's happening in the classroom. An interesting note is that faculty of the Catholic school can provide these services with important caveats. A Catholic school teacher cannot, or any non-public school teacher cannot, provide these services during the periods of their contracted day, and the staff member has to have certifications required for the services. Sometimes we'll see this when there's a third-party provider who is responsible for the specialized instruction, and they will sometimes look to hire staff of the Catholic school when there's flexibility in the services being delivered, say, before or after school. And that's a win for the provider, and it's a win for the students, because then the specialized teacher is generally someone that they might know from seeing around the school. And it certainly is a help to our Catholic school faculty, but very important to make sure that it does not interfere with the contracted school day, and that the teacher has the appropriate certifications that are required by the provider. Related services include occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling, paraprofessional. Those are some. Those are, the big ones that are certainly of help to students, and they can be delivered at the school or at another setting. What I have seen with occupational and physical therapy in some districts, especially if there is a hospital that has an excellent program and has a satellite office, then students will go to that site for those services, but they can certainly be provided at school. The annual review and triennial reevaluation are important in the development of the service plan and the updating of the service plan, and keeping the student on track in terms of what's happening in their educational progress. And the types of testing that will happen every 3 years, which is when the triennial, that's why it's triennial, reevaluation occurs. So the annual review is on the schedule determined by the last annual review. So it's not that it always happens in September or it always happens in June. It is supposed to be within 1 year of the last date of service. The classroom teacher is an important component of this review, because the teacher gives the update on the progress of the student. The parents give their input and observations, especially when it comes to planning for the needs of the student for the next year. Is the student now stepping into a grade where standardized testing is generally given? Is the student stepping into middle school where the classes now are departmentalized, and what challenges will that face for that individual student, and how can the team collectively figure out what supports will help that student? Or is a student in high school and they're getting ready for college planning, transitional planning? What should they be working on now to prepare the child for successful transition to the next phase of their education or life skills? A service plan is what is developed in the non-public school or a Catholic school. And it lists the services that are to be delivered to the student through specialized instruction, or it lists the ancillary or related services. It may list accommodations and modifications that will be made by the classroom teacher, although this is not always so. What we have been noticing is that the service provider will have the accommodations and modifications listed in a separate document, because those are being handled outside of the time that the particular service provider is working with the student. For example, extended time on testing. That specialized teacher is not usually giving a test, they're giving direct instruction. The classroom teacher is giving a test. So the classroom teacher will make sure in school documents that the extended time is listed. Sometimes you'll see it as an attachment. Sometimes it'll be written right into the service plan. Other times it's handled in a document that the school prepares. The service plan, important to note that it's predicated on funding for special education services allotted to the district, which brings us back to Child Find, which is that idea of identifying students and generating funds for the students that then are divided or split amongst the students that have been parentally placed in all the non-public schools in the district. The service plan is a public school document, and it should be kept confidential. It has confidential student information, so one must be careful about how it's handled and where it's kept. They're generally kept in the school office with the principal having control. Or if you have a counselor, the counselor may be the one that has responsibility for the service plan documents. This is a link to a handout. It compares an IEP, the Individualized Education Program, and the service plan. The IEP being the public school document and the service plan being the non-public school document. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is designed to cover qualified students with disabilities that don't fit into those 13 defined disability categories of IDEA. And it applies to students who attend schools receiving federal financial assistance. So to qualify for under Section 504, a student must be determined to have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, or have a record of such an impairment, or be regarded as having such an impairment. Section 504 requires that school districts provide a free, appropriate public education to qualified students who have a physical or mental impairment. And again, that substantially limits one or more major life activities. As we said, Section 504 applies to students that attend schools that receive federal financial assistance, and they are public school documents. Catholic schools are encouraged to write their own school accommodation plan that indicates what the school can provide. And that document should be titled with the name of the school and indicate the basis for the accommodations. Sometimes people will be casual in their conversation and they'll say, oh, I have a 504 plan. Well, we're writing a 504 plan for so-and-so today. Or, oh, did you take a look at the 504 plan? The 504 plan is a public school document. If the Catholic school is going to make an accommodation plan, which they can and should, then that accommodation plan is a school document. And that's why it's important that it be titled with the name of the school and be a reflection of what the school is providing, not something that's just been transposed from, say, a 504 document that a student arrived at the school carrying with them. The Americans with Disabilities Act, we really won't spend time on it in this presentation, other than to say that it goes toward discrimination against staff or students that have disabilities. Titles 1 and 3 generally apply to private schools. However, there is an exception that has been carved out for religious schools who operate on the basis of particular religious tenets. But I'd like to share this quote with you from Sister Angie. Because one is not legally required to do something does not mean that one should not do that thing if it is the right thing to do. Certainly, Catholic schools should be leaders in fighting injustice wherever it is found, especially as it affects those whose disabilities place them among those for whom Christ manifested special concern. To give you a little example of this in action, my son's high school, one of his classmates, his mom had profound hearing loss. And when she'd come to meetings and things, she would text with the teachers, and the teachers would text back to her. And the school realized that they could obtain the services of a sign language interpreter, and that's what they did. So when there were, school-wide meetings or, honors receptions, sports receptions, certainly at graduation, the school had a sign language interpreter who was there to sign what was going on. And that certainly was a reasonable thing to do, the right thing to do. And it certainly allowed this mom to really participate more fully in her son's high school experience. States will have their own special education laws, so you should check your state's laws to see what's on the books in terms of special education. I can give you an example from New Jersey. In New Jersey, Chapter 193 provides for evaluation and determination of eligibility for special education services. It also provides limited related services, including supplementary instruction and speech language correction. Important to note that these state-funded programs are supplemental to the federal IDEA program. So IDEA comes in first, the federal program, and the state programs are usually more limited. Certainly they're more limited in terms of the funding allocated, but they come in behind, supplemental to the federal IDEA programs. Third-party providers, I mentioned a few slides back, and a third-party provider is simply a vendor who is contracted to provide special education services. The district is the one who contracts with the provider. The district themselves can provide the special education services, or oftentimes they will use a third-party provider or someone with whom they've contracted for those services. That contractual arrangement does not extend to the Catholic school. The Catholic school has no contractual arrangement with the provider. However, the district is always responsible for the implementation of the services from that third-party provider. And this has been helpful to remind a district of that. We had an instance where a provider had fallen behind in those annual reviews, which we mentioned a few slides ago, need to take place really within the year of the anniversary date of the review. And we noticed the school noticed that the provider was beginning to fall behind with that. So we reached out to the district, who had been unaware that the provider had gotten backed up and fallen behind. And once we let the district know that this was happening, the district then was reminded of their responsibility, and they made sure that the provider corrected the issue. And they had to bring on additional staff, which they did, so that they could fulfill their legal obligation. There are pitfalls, it seems, in everything, and inclusive education is not immune from that. Well, let's spend a few minutes to talk about some of the more common pitfalls. You might have a student that's not progressing. So the thing to keep in mind is at the time of enrollment, when the parents are saying, yes, we want to choose the school for our child, insist on complete educational records of the student. Look at the test results, drill down into them, discuss them with the parents, talk about how curriculum will be modified for the student, and develop reasonable goals, emphasis on reasonable goals and objectives for student growth, and how that growth will be measured. Another issue can be student behavior. Again, look at those student records closely. Before the student enrolls, invite them to be a student for a few days so you can see how the student acclimates, and the student can see how the school runs and what's expected of them. Another idea, certainly Sister Angie is a proponent of this, is to have all students be admitted provisionally. This way, everyone is on probation, as it were, for a certain period of time. In this way, if there are issues that are insurmountable, then that can be dealt with at that time. But one should always study the behavior. It's not the child, it's the behavior that's the issue. You want to see if that behavior is an outgrowth of the disability. And if so, how can it be managed effectively? Functional behavioral assessments can go a long way to helping with that. And they can result in a behavioral improvement plan. And sometimes with older students, the contract for behavior type of thing. But really, a functional behavioral assessment, an FDA, and a BIP, or behavioral improvement plan, can help us drill down into the cause of behavior that could be disruptive, or that could be, off-putting sometimes to other students and faculty. But to look at why, to look beyond the child and to look at the behavior and how that behavior can be, worked with, because it's the child that we're welcoming and the child that we are serving. Another issue is the ever popular unrealistic parent expectations. It's incumbent on us as administrators and teachers to be clear with parents and to document what the school can and cannot offer, how resources are limited, and parents need to really be their own best advocates with the local district on behalf of their child. And then you have the teachers that don't get it. It's not fair. Why does she get special treatment, or why does he not have to do that? This can challenge a teacher's skill set to have students with special needs. So target professional development opportunities that address common special education issues. Offer real support for the teacher, an extra pair of hands to help in the classroom. Connect the teacher with examples of how special education challenges can be approached. Mentors, coaches, very important for teachers, and will certainly go a long way to helping teachers. Keeping on top of legal protocols, remain informed on developments in special education. Develop a good working relationship with your local district. Reach out to your diocese, your state Department of Education. The Office of Non-Public Education at the U.S. Department of Ed is excellent. and they have staff that is well-versed in special education, all non-public education, of course, but special education is a strength, and they will certainly answer your questions. And don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if something doesn't hit you as sounding right. Know the differences between the public school IEP and the 504 plan, and the service plan, and the Catholic school accommodation plan. Make sure that teachers are familiar with the sections of the service or accommodation plans for their students. And remember to honor the confidentiality of student information. Just to summarize, it's no longer unusual for students eligible for special education to be educated in Catholic schools, and that's a good thing. Inclusion is important for all students. It strengthens the school community. It makes us all richer and better to see God's face in diversity. Observing legal protocols will help schools in offering quality education and Catholic community experiences to all the students they serve. It's a special sadness when a parent cannot choose a Catholic school for their child that, say, their siblings attend, or even Catholic school in general, just because their child has a disability. Welcoming the family, welcoming the whole child is something that our Catholic schools are uniquely equipped with gospel values that invite us to do just that. Here is a list of some resources and references that might be helpful as you explore this topic further. And here's my contact information. If you would like to reach out with any question or comment, I'd certainly be happy to hear from you. And again, thank you for spending this time discussing inclusion in Catholic schools. Thank you.